Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast here from the Snowdon Deli. I'm Aaron Rand from CJD, along with Bill Brownstein of the Montreal Gazette, Leslie Chesterman, and our special guest today, the chair of the English Montreal School Board, Joe Ortona. Joe, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So I can't imagine what possibly you could be able to talk about, other perhaps than the minister, the French language minister, Jean-François Roberge, I think basically calling you out almost by name when he referred to the fact that he's not happy with the level of French being taught in English schools. So first of all, your reaction to that, I know you're not happy with that, and you've made no secret about it.
No, it's about time we start calling out this government when they take cheap shots towards the English-speaking community for no reason. And the truth of the matter is, it was when he was education minister, his own ministry imposed on us that we teach less French in our English schools. So he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. He's imposing less French on our schools, and then he's complaining that we're not doing enough to teach French when kids are struggling in CEGEP. So there's a lot of elements there, but there's a lot of hypocrisy that's coming out of it.
Well, okay, so let's go back and explain to people what is being taught French-wise in EMSB schools.
And why less?
Well, because there's a basic school regulation, and the government thinks that they can impose how many hours of instruction can be in English and in French. That's a whole other battle, but the truth is we have very good French programs in our schools. Most of our schools either have French immersion, which means it's French exclusively from kindergarten to grade 2, and then 50% English, 50% French up to grade 6. And we have bilingual schools where it's 50% French, 50% English from kindergarten to grade 6. So they're getting a good education. They're mastering both languages. They bring that into high school. It allows people like me to study in French if they want to have post-secondary studies and they want to go to Université de Montreal or UQAM, or I studied law at the University of Ottawa, which was also in French. So we're very proud of those results. And we're seeing that the kids who are in Français langue maternelle in high school, who are writing the same French exit exam as the kids in the French sector, are scoring higher, and they're getting better results when you're comparing Montreal with, I don't have the global results for Quebec, but Montreal with Montreal are actually doing better. So the quality of French is there.
Yeah, your point.
I want to just say that again. People get that.
Yes.
The irony in this is that kids coming out of EMSB schools studying in French are doing better on those French exams, those exit exams, than kids in French schools. Did I hear that right?
Right. And you can't forget, we're learning 2 languages in the EMSB, right? We're not learning one. And there's this perception in Quebec, in the general population, because they don't know anything about our system. They know what they did in school. And what they did in school, they go to French school, they get about an hour of English per week. So they think that that's what our kids are getting in our schools, about an hour of French per week. It isn't like that at all. I'm trying to break that perception.
Anyway, your point to Mr. Roberge, which I found really interesting, was that you said your school board teaches better French than the French school boards. And what was his reaction to that?
From what I know, I don't think he's commented, because
I didn't see a comment.
No, because the stats don't lie, and so the numbers are there. And what he's doing is he's capitalizing on things that people are saying about some kids who are struggling in CEGEP with French, and he's trying to paint a global picture that that's the entire English-speaking community. The truth is, we're a public system. We don't refuse any kids. So we have kids that are on the spectrum. We have kids that have social adaptability issues, kids that have learning disabilities, and they have difficulty mastering a second language. We have kids that have those issues in the French system, and they have difficulty mastering French, and that's their only language. So when they impose these restrictions on, like with Bill 96, that now these kids have to take all these extra French classes, we're going to see these kids struggling. And the minister's trying to paint the picture that that's all of the EMSB or all of the English schools across Quebec. It's not the case. But we have to find a way for these kids to be able to graduate and be able to become contributing, successful members of society, not, finding ways to make it more difficult for them to be successful. They're already struggling. We should be easing them into the transition into adulthood and from school to the workforce, not making it harder for them to be successful.
You know, I think back to not that long ago when this subject first came up, this teaching French in English school boards, and it seems to me, and I remember we spoke about this on air, the EMSB sort of prided itself on the fact that it was teaching not just French, but teaching really good enough French that when a kid graduated, they wouldn't have an issue in CEGEP. But then, of course, this all changes now because the restrictions, the qualifications, I guess, in CEGEP are different. Is there a point to it to say that, you know what, yes, you learn good French in an EMSB school, but it's not good enough now based on what the government is asking or telling you have to do to get into a CEGEP?
No, I don't believe that. I think that that's playing into what the government is or what Roberge is trying to do. I think we teach French very well. Our students learn it. They're proficient they're fully bilingual in both official languages. But there are some students who struggle in mastering the languages, and they struggle at mastering a second language, and they have difficulty. That's why we get some students who normally wouldn't have English eligibility, but they come to our schools because they're granted English eligibility under humanitarian grounds, because they have certain learning disabilities and they have difficulty with the language. We have to find ways to help those kids, but for the general population within our schools, they're learning French and they're learning it well. And I don't think taking a couple of more French classes is going to have an effect on them. And I pride myself on it.
Do you have a hard time finding French teachers? Are there a lack of French teachers in Quebec with all of these extra courses that are constantly being added at all levels?
I can tell you our human resources department works practically around the clock throughout the summer to make sure that we have all the teachers that we need, because we are struggling to find teachers. There is a shortage of teachers out there, unfortunately, and there's all sorts of reasons for that, and one of them is the workload and how little support they're getting and resources from the government. I think that's a whole separate issue. But yeah, on the first day of school, I could say we almost have all of our teachers found. Like this year, for example, we had them by Labor Day, which means for a couple of days there were substitute teachers and things like that. So we are struggling to find. But the important thing is we actually have teachers in our classroom, unlike the French sector where the minister said, we can just find a parent volunteer or somebody to sit there and watch the kids and just supervise them, which I think is totally unacceptable.
So to Leslie's point, though, you said the lack of resources, the lack of support from the government with respect to teachers. What would you want to see the government be doing?
Well, I think they need to, first of all, listen to the teachers. I think the teachers are in the classroom every day. They see what's going on. They know where the problems are. They know why teachers are leaving in droves. I mean, it's something like 35% are leaving within the first 5 years. That's a real problem because you're never going to be able to fill that gap,
right?
Because you're constantly looking for teachers. The baby boomers are retiring. They're going to continue to retire over the next couple of years. We have to fill those spots with good qualified teachers, but their workload, their salary, the benefits, all of that has to be beneficial for them to want them to stay.
Sorry, can I ask a point, though? Because there are a lot of people in Montreal who send their kids to private school. Is it true? My mother worked in the education system. She always told me this. You have to be more qualified to work in the public system than in the private system as a teacher.
That's an interesting question. I honestly don't know. I mean, I know that those are ministry regulations, so
right.
I don't know why the rules would be different. They shouldn't be. I mean, you're teaching the same material. So.
We will look into it. Because, there's such a huge population here that just automatically only thinks of private school. Public school is often left behind for a million reasons because of this but, if I'll find out. We'll find out about the teachers.
We'll find out.
But we assume they aren't as good. There's all this stuff about the two. And yet, from what I hear, it is.
Well, I heard that in the private
teachers.
sector they're not paid as high.
Right.
I heard that. Also,
In the private sector, they're not paid as high?
No,
they'd be paid
teachers,
more.
You would think, but
They're not.
I heard that they're not.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And I've heard that
I've
from
heard that
several
too.
sources,
Yeah.
so I believe that. Also, Bill 21 doesn't apply to the private sector, so they don't have these arbitrary restrictions
right.
either that
Which
make
brings
it even
about
harder to find
the
teachers.
other point with Bill 21, a lot of people are going to the private sector because maybe they wish to go to the public sector, but they can't, and they have the money go the other way. How is that impacting in terms of you guys? Because of people bolt from the public system in terms of getting money from the government and all the rest, it must have an impact.
Of course it has an impact, and we've had to refuse about a dozen teachers up to now, and it's impossible to say how many, because so many, they know the rules, they know what the law is, so they don't even bother to apply. So it's impossible to get an accurate statistic.
And it's
there.
students too, though, like, who are also leaving the public system because being affected by the same principles, where like the parents haven't been here long enough, they want an English education or something, and they fall between the cracks. So on that level too, I think it might have an impact.
Yeah, I mean, everything has an impact, it's, we have to find ways to find these solutions. That falls on the government, and unfortunately, they said that education is their priority. Yeah. They definitely have not shown that in the last 5.5 years.
I asked about, when you talk about lack of resources, lack of funding, you're talking about French teachers specifically. Government announced $600 million over the next 5 years with respect to teaching French, not in schools necessarily, to asylum seekers, temporary immigrants, etc. How much money would it take, or is money the answer here, to be able to recruit enough French teachers to fill the void that you're dealing with now? Is it about money? Only money?
I don't think it's about money necessarily. I mean, people who go into the teaching profession, I think they have a general good idea of what the salary is, but it's about having the resources to deal with the issues in the classroom. Some schools are overpopulated. Some schools, we keep increasing the number of students in a classroom. Right. We have more kids because the science is improving. We know how many kids now are coded or on the spectrum and things like that. So we need to take into account these things when we are setting the size of a classroom. Now, the only way we can do that is if we get the adequate funding from the government of Quebec. We rely on the government of Quebec. They set our annual budget. So if we're not getting the money, then we're not able to disperse that where it should be dispersed.
The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowdon Delicatessen, where we are. 75 years in business, the home of Montreal's greatest smoked meat, plus carnotzel, potato latkes, and the famous Snowdon Deli party sandwiches. That's the Snowdon Delicatessen.
I would ask you the question, maybe it's a bit unfair, Joe, but you're dealing now with the French language minister, who used to be, ironically enough, the education minister. So there has been some contact, I would guess, but then I remember reading a while ago, in the midst of all this, and I think this may be unique to this government, there's very little negotiation, discussion between the government and the actual board. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's very accurate. And it's hard to have a dialogue when you're dealing with a government that doesn't even recognize your legitimacy to exist. Yeah. I mean, they tried to abolish school boards. And even after we won in court repeatedly on the Bill 40 issue, we never really got a sense of respect or any kind of legitimacy whatsoever that, we're the spokespersons for the English-speaking community or for English education. It's sort of like this top-down, we tell you what to do and you don't have a say, which of course doesn't respect Section 23 at all, our right to manage and control our school system, but they don't care. And the only thing that we've gotten them to bend a little bit on is, the constant threat of going to court. And that's how we got Minister Drainville to back down on Bill 23, which was another school reform, which shows that Bill 40 was a failure because they needed another reform 18 months later where they were going to, name the DG and be able to overrule school board decisions, which are clear violations of our right to manage and control. And only because we said repeatedly, if you do this, we're going to court the next day, that they finally backed off. And that's about the only thing that they understand or that's worked so far.
Which is interesting because then, of course, you can't help but think, for you pushing back, when I say you, I mean the school board pushing back on 40, then on Bill 96, they kind of look at you and go, you're a bit of a fly in the ointment here, and we're going to do this just to kind of poke at you. You feel that sometimes?
Yeah.
Well, they admit you're a thorn in their side. I mean, they pretty...
Yeah. I mean, look, François Legault called the EMSB a radical group.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what's so radical about standing up for our rights, wanting our rights to be preserved and protected, and when you're going to violate them, that we're gonna fight back. I mean, other than the Court of Appeal decision on Bill 21 that came recently, we've won in court every round. So I don't know who the radical is. Is it the school board that's fighting for our rights? Or is it the government that is repeatedly violating people's rights and with complete disregard and using the notwithstanding clause and all of that?
Well, that's the whole point. I think they try to depict you as an anti-Franco kind of group, which I find kind of interesting because it wouldn't appear that that's the
Right,
situation.
of course, and they're going to do that because it does work. Politics of division works. You see it in the United States. You see it here more and more. And the truth is, that's what they do. They do that to score cheap political points. The truth of the matter is, I speak French. I speak it well. I'm proud of the fact that I speak French. I speak it every day. It's my language of work, and that's the reality. The reality is they're trying to paint the picture that the English-speaking community is a unilingual hub from the West Island that has refused to adapt to Quebec culture. We were the ones that created the French immersion programs in the 1960s because we wanted our kids to be fully proficient in French, a full 15 years before Bill 101. So we've always been ahead of the curve when it comes to language.
And the fact of the matter is, when I grew up, a lot of other people did. We couldn't go to French schools unless you were Catholic, and so that nobody talks about that.
Well, they denied that ever happened, right? Because that's
it
Quebec
happened.
bashing, and you're accusing Francophone Quebecers of being bigoted and racist. But the truth of the matter is, my background is Italian. Both my parents were born in Italy. They came here. They were Catholic, and they spoke Italian, which is much more similar to French. The parents my grandparents who came here, they were working. The language that they adopted in the workforce was French. It only made sense to want to send your kids to French school because it was easier for them to learn. My father was told, "You're not going to school here." They took him outside. He said, "There's the school across the street. That's the school you're going to," and it was an English school. And sort of there's like a whole denial that this ever happened because they don't like that that's our history, but it is. And then they wonder why so many Ukrainians, Polish, Greeks, and Italians, Portuguese, people that immigrated here pre-Bill 101, continue to send their kids to English schools. Well, because that's where they were made to feel welcome. And once you adapt to that language and culture, well, then that's what you're going to be more inclined to assimilate.
There's also a fact that I don't think enough people know is that in the English Montreal School Board, it's a minority now of the schools that are purely English schools. Aren't the majority of schools immersion or a double program? Like really a solely English school like Carlisle and TMR and all that, there are very few of them left.
Yeah, over 75% of our schools have a French immersion or a bilingual program.
And there's another point, having been a mother who put my kids into French school, that I don't think is very controversial, except Anglophones who put their kids in French school are actually putting their kids at a disadvantage because it will be harder for them to get good marks. So by the time they're at the university level, they've always, I think, suffered marks-wise by not learning in their mother tongue. And so this is something that here in Quebec, we want our kids to learn French. I did it myself. But I have to say as a parent is that I think my kids actually would have done a lot better had their education been in English and I'd sent them to English school. And I think it was a little bit of a sacrifice. I understand why, and this is very controversial what I'm saying, but we as English parents who want our kids to learn in French, especially if we send them to purely French school, are putting our kids at a disadvantage that will last all the way to university. No American would ever do that. Yeah. They want their kids to be at full advantage to get into good schools along the way. But I think our kids actually, and I don't think that anybody realizes this, that these kids, it is difficult to learn in a language that's not your mother tongue. And I think that you guys are important to be there just for an alternative also for people, Anglophones who don't want to send their kids, to give them a bilingual education. And I think that's not acknowledged enough.
Yeah. Well, it's absolutely important that our schools continue to be there. And of course, we need kids in our schools because otherwise we're going to lose those schools eventually. And you raised some great points. And there's two really big misconceptions about the public system, and in particular the English public system, that we're all working hard to really try to break at the EMSB. And the first one is about the quality of French, and we see it in the exam results. So the truth is, if you're sending your kids to our schools, you're not losing out on the French. And it's hard to break that perception because it appears illogical. If you think about it, you say, I want my kid to be fully proficient in French. French is important for me. I don't want my kids to move out west or to the United States. I want them to stay here. Well, I'm going to put them in French school because that's where they're going to get the best French possible, the best French education possible. But the results are showing the opposite. And it's the same thing with private and public school. The ministry results that just came out now are showing we're getting the as high a success rate as the private sector. So our kids are doing really well in spite of the fact that they're not investing enough in education and they're underfunding us. In spite of the fact that we're having these challenges, staffing, finding teachers and resource personnel. In spite of those challenges, we're doing as well as the private sector. In language, we're doing as well as the French sector. And these are perceptions that are hard to break because people think that the French system is better to learn French, and people think that if you're paying, well, the private system is better than the public system. But the facts are showing that it's the opposite.
I totally agree. If I were to do it again, I'm not sure I would send my kids to French school. I think I might put them in English school with good French classes instead of them really suffering in a French school where, by the way, the English classes were terrible. I mean, there's that flip side too, So they can say maybe our French classes aren't great. Let's talk about their English. I mean, it's not as big a topic, and I'm being a little pushing some buttons here, but I don't know if I'd put them in French school again. I think I'd rather because their French at the end wasn't so much better.
What do you think the government's end goal is for English schools here? You must have an inkling what they wish. I mean, when you speak to the various, you don't speak so often to them, Roberge, Danville, what do you think is their goal? What is their wish?
Question.
I think their wish is just to have English schools in areas where there's a number of students there that warrants having those schools, but they're not going to do anything to encourage people to enroll in English school. They're not going to do anything to make it easier. They're always going to make it more difficult. Bill 96 now, we're going to see the effect on the temp stays that used to get English eligibility. Now they're going to get it, but it's non-renewable. So we're going to see a decline in enrollment all throughout Quebec and mostly in Montreal. So they're always looking at ways that, our population is going to erode. And they're looking for ways to make that faster. That's what I see. And so they'll be able to justify taking schools in the future if enrollment continues to decline. That's what I see as their end game.
So with respect to that, the court challenge to Bill 96 that you're now taking to the Supreme Court, you win that, what does that change as far as English school boards are concerned?
So 96 is not at the Supreme Court yet. That's
Sorry.
Bill 21.
Getting eventually.
96, well, it will get to the
Right.
Supreme Court for sure. Well, everything that we're fighting on Bill 96 is everything touching language and culture within our school board. So, the right to communicate, the right to educate, the right internally and externally with others, that we have the right to do that because that's the only way that we're going to be able to preserve our language. And again, the government, uses that as some sort of they see it as some sort of anti-Francophone attack, again, to create more division. But the truth is, the English community, and especially the English schools that are constitutionally protected, can thrive in Quebec society, and French can thrive all throughout Quebec together. It's not one or the other. It's not a pie where when you take a slice, you're taking it from somewhere else. Both can be true, and we should be trying to achieve those goals. But that's not popular with the government to do that. So, they continue with the politics of division, and they see the court challenges as sort of an affront and an insult. And, how dare you use public money to do this? Well, when the federal government infringes on what they think is provincial jurisdiction, I've never seen the Quebec government say, well, we're not going to use public money. Of course they use public money. I mean, it's the Quebec government. We're the EMSB. We're a public institution. I mean, can't help to what we are. That's what we are.
I want to ask one thing because we're going to run out of time. So we ended up delving into a bit of politics here. You ran, or were going to run, in the last municipal election. It didn't end up working out under Denny Coderre. Part of that, I believe, was because of your position on Bill 96. Do you have or do you see a future involved politically, either municipally or provincially, for yourself?
those doors are always open, I guess.
that's
I
not-
don't know.
no,
It depends.
no, I need a
There you
better
go.
answer than that.
No, but look, the political reality today is, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, that doesn't just depend on me. I mean, which provincial party do you think would want me? Because I'm a guy, I'm vocal. I speak my mind. I say what I mean, and I mean what I say, and I don't mince my words, and I don't pull any punches, and credit where credit is due, but also criticism where it's deserved.
Well, you're
hold on.
making
I
a
know-
run for, you're running, you have already announced you're going to run to be chair again in November of the school board, so.
Yeah, but that's a whole different ballgame. That's not
you
federal
do
or
both?
provincial or municipal.
I can reel the parties that don't want to have you, Joe. That'd be the CAC and the PQ. I think we can take the two of them out. Probably
Not sure about Quebec Solidaire.
Maybe
yeah. Well,
Quebec
maybe
Solidaire.
these days they might
So
be.
that's a liberal, or that's maybe even a conservative. I mean, provincially. Are you interested? If they approach you, would you be willing to listen? I'm not making a pitch for them. I'm just asking.
Look, I'm always willing to listen, but I mean, Bill 21, Bill 40, Bill 96, those are issues that are really important to me, and our vision on those cases, on where we go from, in the future, where we go in terms of linguistic policy, those are things in which we would have to be aligned. I'm not willing to sacrifice
Right.
those values just to have a job somewhere and be a politician. I don't care how safe the seat would be, and you could see that. That's why I got booted out in the municipal race. I mean, I spoke my mind. I said what I meant, and
Right.
it
Maybe you're
happened the way
in
it
the
happened.
right place now. Maybe we need somebody like you in that place as well, to fight from where you are.
Yeah, but in order for that to happen, you also need, leadership within certain major parties that are willing to stand up and say what might be controversial.
You sound like you're saying the Liberals are not that party,
Yeah.
or at least haven't proven themselves to be that party.
Well, whenever we get to the language issue, everybody sort of gets scared. There was a time when, Bill 21, because it was so popular, that nobody really wanted to say that they were against it. I mean, only when they got pushed and they had to finally vote did some parties vote against it. But it was like everybody, we're going to offend people, and this is too popular. We're going to lose vote. People change in their voting intentions. I mean, the Conservatives, for example, are 44% now. It wasn't anywhere near that 10 years ago. People change. Your values are not supposed to change, at least not that drastically over a short period of time. So, I mean, if you lose votes because of your positions and your values, that's fine. You'll make up for it at some other point. That's the way I see it.
There's a municipal election coming up in a year, right, in 2025. You almost ran until the issue with Denny Coderre. Do you have an interest in municipal politics as opposed to provincial or even federal?
Well, right now I'm concentrating on the school board elections because they're in November, and those are going to be important because we have, as I said, a lot of challenges, and we're doing many great things in the schools. We want to keep doing that and keep the success rate at the top where it is, and we have our core challenges, which are important to me, and I want to see them through. But, as I said, if anybody wants, people know who I am, people know what I believe in, what I stand for. And if they feel that I fit into their party, then I'm more than willing to have a discussion. Sure.
Yeah, but it's also important at the school board level because not enough good people are running for those seats. Not enough people vote in school board elections. And so I think it's important for you to be where you are because,
That's a very good
Thank
point.
you.
And
You don't
what is the
always have
percent?
to-
How many people? Like 20%, 15% show up for school board election?
it's not.
So our last contested elections 10 years ago had a turnout of 21%. We're hoping that it's going to be higher. At least every school board election that's been held, our turnout always went up. So, can we get to 25%? Can we get to 30? I think that would be fantastic because that's almost where we are at the municipal level. The only thing we can do is put our ideas out there, encourage people to get involved, encourage people to vote. Obviously, if there are contested elections, that's the more there are contested seats, the more the population is going to be engaged. I think that helps. So we have to do all of those things and encourage people that encourage them to inform themselves on the issues and vote.
I love that, Leslie. You snuffed out his political ambitions by telling him to stay at the school.
No, absolutely, because there are political ambitions, but you can move up the ladder with nobody listening to you. It's better to be in a position that you actually can have some kind of effect on what's going on in this province instead of being in a party that you're just there, you were voted in, and you're sitting on a backbench.
Is that how you feel?
Well, I think if I was like a liberal M&A in a safe West Island seat that, where I got 75% of the vote and I was a backbench opposition M&A, I don't think I'd be as much of a thorn in Legault's side. The truth is that,
Exactly.
at the EMSB, we're able to make decisions, we're able to challenge the ministry, we're able to challenge the government, we're able to take them to task. And we're constitutionally protected. So we always have that, and they can't use the notwithstanding clause against us. So I know that the EMSB and these court challenges are very important because they're going to shape English education for the next generations.
Right.
And I know that they're important, and I do want to see them through.
Right.
Joe, we are out of time. I want to thank you so much for coming in and joining us, and
was a
wish
real
you all the
pleasure.
best, regardless of what it is you end up doing.
Thank you
Being
so
a
much.
thorn in the side,
That's right.
Mr. Legault.
Continue to be.
Yeah.
I'll try.
That wraps up this episode of the Corner Booth Podcast. We'll see you again soon.